Good evening, my name is Jessica Stats, and this evening I'm going to briefly touch on the context of the canon of La Violencia in Colombia. This project was completed as part of the Masters in Translation through Dr. Lowe's class at NYU. Just to kind of give some rationale and background on the project, I chose to focus on these two works because it correlated with my thesis project. I was therefore able to cross-utilize sources and better develop not only my translation, but my comprehension of both therein. As well as I got the ability to explore some lesser-known authors. A main component of both this project and the thesis project was finding a work that had not yet been translated into English. With Dr. Lowe's assistance, I definitely think we were successful in that. And also, I was able to bank on these two experiences to investigate the contrastive elements across text types. So I analyzed the novella as well as a literary critique that focused on the novella as well as another novel of the Violencia period. So let's just briefly talk about the nature of the text. El Jardín de las Hartmann is a literary work. It's in a literary novella fiction format. And I was able to analyze the integration of literary devices and mainly highlight on the historical context of La Violencia, as well as the pattern of cyclical narrative. In El Jardín de las Hartmann, Jorge Eliezer Pardo explores the universality of violence within the literary canon of La Violencia. He analyzes social order, the constructs of collective memory, and retraces the self-imposed borders of identity. In Algunos Rasgos, Professor Alberio Arias, who is a professor of literatura in la Universidad de Tolima, expresses these same things as the distinguishing attributes of the canon itself, as well as critical reflection of La Violencia in other literary and actually nonfiction works. He wants to share this context with the rest of the world, and he does so through the analysis of El Jardín de las Hartmann, as well as No Morirás by Hermín Santamaría. This project provided me the platform to correlate research and findings across courses, as well as show me the cumulative nature of this program overall. So these two different text types allowed me to further explore La Violencia, as well as improve my ability to translate Colombian Spanish. I also had the opportunity to review subject-specific terminology. These terms here were specifically utilized, maybe not in the text itself, but through the concepts and themes of the text therein. For example, Jorge Eliezer Pardo discusses character and dialogue in the context of the Violencia. So he formulates these strong female heroine characters and their dialogues with the atypical, weaker male characters in the context of La Violencia. He provides a sensory experience to the reader, and honestly, it's hard to put the book down. One thing that he does that presented a challenge in both translating and comprehension was the significant use of figurative language, as well as flashback, and I'd say a little bit of flash forward, depending on the tense and kind of understanding the tenses in Spanish. This definitely provided for an interesting read, but outside the context of La Violencia, it may be difficult to understand his use of these literary devices. That's why it was critical to look at a secondary source. So in the literary critique, the professor discusses archetype and its role in Colombian literature. He also discusses the need to critically reflect upon the literature beyond the storyline and beyond character development. So this was something for me that was important because I was focused on the strong characters in the novella, and sometimes I think that gave me blinders to what was really going on inside the historical and almost biographical context of the novella. He also discusses meeting point and stereotype. So the meeting point of the characters, or a climax, is critical in understanding not only the theme, but the importance within the realm of La Violencia. He also discusses stereotype and how authors in La Violencia had to at times utilize stereotype, but also at times had to steer away from it in order to make sure their message was clearly conveyed. To briefly touch on the contrastive analysis, the 3 points I'd like to highlight are register, authenticity, and style. The literary critique, of course, was in a formal style register, whereas the novella would be best described as a creative register. In fiction, especially narrative fiction, the author has to correlate formal narration at times with informal kind of colloquial dialogue in order to get the message across to the reader that is seeking that fiction experience. Whereas in the case of the literary critique, formal register is necessitated in order to be taken seriously as well as getting approved for publication. Authenticity, I found, was very critical in the appreciation of the time of La Violencia, because these two authors are both from Tolima and they both have either that first-hand or second generational experience with this time period. The use of subjunctive was probably the most prevalent issue I encountered with the understanding of style or contrasting the analysis of style therein, and that in English we utilize subjunctive specifically in formal writing sessions, and even then it's rarely used, at least from my experience. Of course, I'm not as well read in that area, but in Spanish, subjunctive is used in formal and informal, and it's just a different element to the equation in both translating and comprehensibility. So kind of banking on translation challenges, the influence of my L1 English structures to L2, again, affected comprehension and translation. They definitely aided when words had the same Latin roots and I could kind of make sure it wasn't a false cognate. However, in sentence structure, for example, we're similar from Spanish to English, so we have a subject, verb, and object. However, indirect object pronouns as well as modifiers can significantly change the meaning if the placement is incorrect. Therefore, I had to work with read aloud methods in order to make sure I was grasping who was being modified and what was actually happening. Style, I would say that the literary critique was not as creative in style, obviously, because it's more formal, whereas the novella, the author wanted to mirror the meandering style of human memory. So in conclusion, I just would like to reassert that the read aloud strategy helped me not only with phonology, pronunciation, and working with the rhythm of the text, but also with understanding the meaning. I also liked the fact that I was able to see the applicability of the literary terminology both in practice in the novella, but also through investigation in the literary critique. Definitely a needed refresher, but also aided my development of the thesis of this project as well as the direction of my thesis. And I just also wanted to highlight something that maybe I wasn't quite expecting. I understand the importance of peer-reviewed academic sources, of course, but the importance of this literature review in this project really helped guide my direction, helped refresh me in grammar, helped refresh me in different concepts, especially in the use of articles and attributive nouns. So definitely something that I wanted to make mention of. Again, here's a list of my sources. It is pretty comprehensive. I tried to select sources from different universities. I found a lot of valuable resources from European universities that are specifically focused on the contrastive stylistic differences between Spanish and English. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for your time.